All right, we cross live now to Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who is in New York for us. Sherwin, with just 5 days to go until Election Day, what are the issues on Americans' minds and how does that inform who might win this race come early next week?
So much of the support so far is pretty much baked in. You know the entities that are running. Donald Trump is very well known to his base of supporters. And Kamala Harris, perhaps starting a bit late after Joe Biden's exit from the race in July, has managed to coalesce a coalition of Democratic supporters around her nomination. And so that's why you have the polls reflecting a very even race that is going to go down to the wire. So really it's going to come down to the issues, right? What motivates people to get to the polls? The number one issue in this election is the economy. High inflation, which has now come down, but how will that inform people's vote in the ballot? Is immigration the top issue? Border security, which is a top issue for the Trump campaign. Is this an election that will see record turnout in terms of reproductive rights and access to abortion? Is your shtick about America's or saving America's democracy? Are you a misogynist who doesn't believe that a woman should lead, or are you a progressive who believes the woman's time has come, particularly how blindingly close we came in 2016 to Hillary Clinton becoming the first female president in the over 250 years that the United States has been a country? So this is a very diverse electorate, right? I mean, foreign policy issues, the war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, how does that inform how people are going to vote? So a very tight race, and Fundo, those are some of the issues. The question is, how are the two campaigns going to drive their supporters to the poll, ensure that their base turns out, and that really comes down to ground game. Here's the terminology you're going to hear in the next 5 days. Ground game. How are people getting their voters to the polls? Are they knocking on doors? Are they making telephone calls? Are they, picking up people who can't make it to the polls by themselves? This is all part of a very broad calculus, a very broad equation that really will determine who wins come the end of voting day on November 5th.
Now, Sherwin, we've seen from some of your reporting that there is a high level of anxiety on both sides of the political divide. Just speak to us about the sense of urgency among supporters for both sides and concern about how a close election result could play out in the United States.
I think it also speaks, the question really speaks to how long we've been going at this, right? And how it's been elevated on the various news channels day in and day out. We talk about this campaign. And that, I think, is part of why people are so anxious, right? In a close election, if the polls are to be believed, this is going to come down to a few thousand votes in some of the swing states, which means the margin of victory here could be very, very narrow. And how will that inform how people react to this? You've seen from the Trump campaign consistently since his election loss in 2020, casting aspersions about the integrity of U.S. elections, of course, going to court over 60 times to question those results, and of course, every single case being dismissed by Republican-appointed judges and Democratic-appointed judges. So the veracity of U.S. elections is sound, but Trump continues to talk them down, and this could inform how his supporters, were he to win, were he to lose, react to this election result. And we have a very good lesson to learn, right? In 2021, the January 6th, Donald Trump's unverified accusations that that election was stolen resulted in his supporters rioting and storming the U.S. Congress while they were seeking to certify Joe Biden's win. And so you're seeing in swing states like Nevada is the first example where the governor has already initiated activated the National Guard to be on standby on election day out of an abundance of caution and concern. And so there is a very real threat of violence based on the rhetoric that is emanating from the Trump campaign, and that, I think, is leading to additional anxiety, particularly in the context, Mfundo, of this being a very tight race, and a very tight race right until the finish.
Now, honestly, quite unfortunate that, there's still that threat, as you state, of possible violence post those elections. But then with the many commentators that we've interacted with, they seem to say it's just too close to call. Have you spoken to any commentators that would say that, at least from their vantage point, they can see a clear winner?
Well, Alan Lichtman is a professor of history at America University, and we had a piece with him yesterday where he has 13 keys that determine who wins the White House. And his forecasts have been accurate since Ronald Reagan beat Jimmy Carter back in 1981. The only election he got wrong was his prediction that Al Gore would have beaten George W. Bush in the 2000 race. But as you know, Mfundo, that decision came down to a Supreme Court ruling based on the counting of ballots in the state of Florida. So Lichtman's perspective is he was right that Gore should have won because he won the popular vote. It was the Supreme Court that got it wrong. So this guy is pretty accurate. He is sticking to his analysis that Kamala Harris has the edge here in terms of this election. But the polling certainly speaks to a very tight race. Will Harris be able to protect the blue wall, those swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania? If she wins those three, she gets above 270 electoral college votes and therefore wins the presidency. Is Trump able to win Pennsylvania, where they're showing a dead heat here? The problem with the polling is this. The margin of error in all the polls tells us that this election can go either way.
Yeah.
If Kamala Harris is winning by 1 or Donald Trump is winning by 1, the margin of error is 3 to 4. What does that tell you? So we have to lean into where the margin of error is really to determine who's going to win this election. And no one can tell you quite where that margin will land. That is the problem we face today.
But it's quite incredible, the fact that you have many speaking of a very tight race when you speak and remember that Kamala Harris is in fact a late entrant, but already we're speaking of it being too close to call. Sherwin, thank you very much for that update. Sherwin Bryce-Pease is in New York for us. All right, more news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us.